Welcome, dreamers, to Twilight Tale, where history slumbers and whispers of the past come alive. Tonight, we invite you to drift into a world of Roman builders and engineers, extraordinary minds who crafted a legacy that still echoes through time. Relax. Let the gentle flow of this tale lull you into a peaceful state as we take you on a journey back to an era where monumental structures were born from the hands of tireless creators. So, close your eyes, let your mind wander, and sleep through the work of Roman builders and engineers. In the hush before dawn, when even the wind seems to hold its tongue, a single block of pale stone waits beneath a moonlit sky. It lies as if placed there by a hand that never wished to be seen, square-shouldered, quiet, patient. Around it, the ground is powdered with fine dust, and the dust itself gathers into small spirals, as though the earth has been turning in its sleep. Above, the moon hangs like a sealed silver coin, and the stars look down with an old, unblinking kindness. It is said that some stones are only stone, and that others, rare, unnamed, carry a different listening inside them. This one feels like that, not because it moves, not because it speaks, but because it seems to wait with a kind of breathless attention, as if the night has leaned close and taught it a secret, how to hold emptiness without collapsing, how to cradle air the way a chest cradles prayer. Who taught the stone to breathe? If you bring your thoughts near it, you can almost hear the answer forming, not as words, but as a sensation, a slow widening, a soft surrender, a promise that weight does not always mean violence, and that strength can arrive like a ritual, candle-lit and calm. Beneath the silence, the journey opens, and the stone, pale, moon-washed, becomes a gate. To understand this stone, we follow it backward, into the long patience of Roman hands, not the Rome of shouting crowds and clashing bronze, but the Rome that wakes early, before the streets begin to speak, the Rome of builders and measurers, of quiet rituals practiced in dust and sunlight, the Rome where the day begins with careful looking. Imagine the quarry at dawn. Mist clings to cut walls, softening their sharp scars. The rock face rises like a sleeping giant, marked by lines and fractures that seem less like damage and more like a language. In that gray-blue hour, the stone is not yet a thing to be taken, it is a presence to be approached. Whispers tell us the old builders did not choose blindly. They listened, not with ears for music, but with senses trained to feel what the world hides. They would run their palms along a seam, tapping gently, tap, tap, as if asking permission. They watched for grains that flowed straight and true, for the subtle patterning that revealed how the stone wanted to be cut. They searched for a kind of internal honesty, a line of strength that could hold without complaint. Where memory fades, tradition remains like a scent in cloth. No scroll can fully capture the moment a stone agrees to become something else. No written formula can record the way a builder's breath changes when he finds the right block, how his shoulders loosen, how his touch becomes reverent. And then the cutting begins. Wedges kiss the rock, water darkens the surface, dust blooms pale as dawn itself. The sound is not the sound of war, but of insistence, steady, humble, repeating. A chisel does not rush, it returns again and again, like waves teaching a shore what shape to become. In time, the block is freed, and the first miracle appears, that the stone, once part of a mountain's stillness, can be moved without losing its dignity. It can travel, it can change hands, it can leave its birthplace and still remain itself. The Romans did not merely transport stone, they escorted it, as if guiding a sacred guest. Along roads lined with cypress and dust, past fields that breathe with morning fog, the block arrives where it is needed. It joins other blocks, brothers and sisters of the same earth, stacked like sleeping animals in the shade. And here, beneath open sky, the second ritual begins. Measure, not as a cold instruction, but as a devotion. A line is drawn, a curve imagined, a plumb weight hangs and finds truth by surrendering to gravity. The tool is small, yet it speaks with authority. This is straight, this is false. The builder obeys not because he must, but because he understands that stone remembers every error. Then comes the arch. An arch is a strange prayer, isn't it? A shape that holds because it yields, two sides leaning toward one another, agreeing to share the burden, each block, each voussoir tilted in trust, angled so the weight above does not crush downward, but flows outward, into the arms of the structure. It is not brute resistance, it is choreography. It is said the Romans loved the arch the way sailors love stars, because it offers direction through danger, it offers passage, it offers a way to place immense weight in the air and have it stay there, calm and unthreatening. And still, when you stand before one, the question returns like a tide. How? How did such heaviness learn grace? We think of iron, of chains, of nails, of harsh things. But the arch does not require iron cries to hold itself together. Its strength is older than metal. Its strength is the geometry of agreement, the patient alignment of forces that wish to move and are taught to settle. A wooden frame, temporary, humble, supports the stones as they climb. Each block is placed with care, as if laid into a lullaby. Dust falls in slow drifts, the sun slides across the site. Time itself seems to soften, and then the keystone, the final stone, the one that looks no different at first glance, and yet changes everything. When it is set into place, the arch becomes whole. The frame beneath can be removed, and the stones, astonishingly, remain. Not because they are glued, not because they are chained, because they are listening to one another, because every block leans into the next, like sleepers sharing warmth. Beneath the arches, air becomes a soft river. It moves without hurry, collecting sound, carrying it gently forward. Footsteps become echoes, and echoes become memories, and memories thin into the kind of silence that feels inhabited. If you close your eyes beneath a high vault, you can almost hear what is no longer there, the shuffle of sandals, the murmur of water in aqueduct channels, the faint clink of tools being set down at the end of a day. And above that river of air, The stone holds, day after day, year after year, century after century. Rain comes and the stone is wet. Sun comes and the stone is warm. Moss comes and the stone grows a green whisper at its edges. Earthquakes come and some arches fall, but others remain, still leaning, still agreeing, still holding the invisible. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. In the half-light of later ages, people would stand beneath Roman arches and feel the strange calm that lives there. They would not always know why. They would not always have the words. But the body understands what the mind forgets, that these spaces were made not merely to function, but to endure like a vow. And so the myths begin. Myths of lost formulas hover like incense in ruined corridors. Stories of secret proportions, of sacred numbers whispered from master to apprentice. Knowledge passed mouth to ear, never written, now veiled. Perhaps it was practical, hard-earned experience repeated until it became instinct. Perhaps it was more than that. Perhaps the builders believed the stone had a spirit, and that only certain hands could coax it into harmony. Marked by the moon, a rumor says, the best stones were chosen on nights when the sky was clear and silent, when the stars looked closest, when the world felt thin. Beneath the silence, another rumor says, the true technique was not measurement at all, but attention, because attention is what transforms weight into grace. A hurried hand makes a brittle arch. A careless eye invites collapse, but a patient builder, one who can stand still long enough to notice a grain, a flaw, a whisper, creates something that outlives his name. And the contradiction lingers like a soft ache. How did so much weight learn to stand with such gentleness? Perhaps the answer is simpler than we want it to be. Perhaps the arch does not defy nature. Perhaps it obeys nature so completely that it feels like magic. Now return gently to the first stone, the pale block beneath the moon. In the mind's eye, you can see it placed among others, lifted into a curve, leaning into its neighbor. You can feel the moment when the wooden frame is removed and the arch remains, quietly astonished by its own wholeness. And then, time. Time passes the way sand passes through fingers. Empires thin, roads crack, names fade, but the arches, some of them, remain, breathing slowly in morning fog. They hold silence the way a chest holds prayer. If you stand beneath them in the hour before dawn, when the world is still deciding whether to wake, you might sense it, a nearly imperceptible expansion and release, not literal breath, not movement you can measure, but a presence, a calm persistence, a stone lullaby. It is said that the truest structures do not shout their strength, they simply endure. And perhaps that is the secret the stone learned, not to conquer the air, but to cradle it, not to resist the weight, but to distribute it, share it, soften it, until the burden becomes a kind of music too low to hear, but real enough to feel. In the final stillness, the arches remain, and whether the formulas were lost or never meant to be written, the result is here, a curve of pale stone, holding emptiness like a sacred bowl, letting the sky pass through it, letting the wind pass through it, letting your thoughts pass through it, slowly, gently, as sleep approaches. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps the stone does not breathe because someone taught it. Perhaps it breathes because, for a moment in history, human hands learned how to listen so deeply, so patiently, that the earth agreed to sing back in silence. And beneath that silence, the arches continue, breathing, holding, dreaming. How did water learn the way home? Not the loud kind of learning, no trumpet call, no sudden command, but the slow education of patience, the kind that happens when the world is quiet enough to hear the smallest pull, when hills are sleeping, when valleys are still holding their morning mist like folded cloth, when the stars remain overhead, not yet dismissed by day. It is said that in such hours, water remembers what it is. Not a possession, not a prize, but a pilgrim. And somewhere beneath those sleeping hills, a thin silver line begins to move. At first, it is only a suggestion, an intake at a spring's mouth, framed in pale stone and shadow. Moss clings to the edges like a soft green prayer. The surface trembles with tiny spirals, and in that trembling there is a feeling, an old reverence, like the hush inside a temple before the first candle is lit. Beneath the silence, you can sense a beginning, a quiet decision made between earth and thirst. The Romans did not always speak of conquest when they spoke of water. Sometimes they spoke without words, of listening. Imagine them not as shouting masters of the world, but as early risers with dust on their hands and gentleness in their measure, men who stood near springs and placed their palms against stone, feeling for coldness, for steadiness, for the pulse of hidden sources. Men who watched how a reed leaned, how dampness darkened a patch of ground, how fog gathered in a hollow as if drawn there by something unseen. Whispers tell us they trusted slope the way sailors trust stars, because slope does not argue, it only continues. And the stars, when seen through a veil of dawn, remind the mind to think in lines and arcs, not in haste. So the first ritual begins, the route, not carved on a bright map, but traced across the world with careful steps, across ridges where wind speaks in low tones, along valleys where the air holds ancient coolness, through places where the earth's skin changes, clay red giving way to light sandstone yellow, then to pale limestone, then to dark, mineral-rich rock that feels older than speech. Where memory fades, the land keeps its own records. A faint dip in a hillside, a seam of damp stone, a hollow where birds gather, a taste in the air. To follow water is to follow subtlety. And so the aqueduct is born, not as a single monument, but as a series of quiet agreements with the terrain. A channel here, a bridge there, a tunnel cut gently through a stubborn rise. Each choice is made with a kind of respect. Each bend feels like a bow to gravity. Because gravity is the oldest law, and the Romans, in their finest work, did not fight it. They followed it like a prayer. The aqueduct appears in the mind as a ribbon, thin, steady, unbroken. Sometimes it rides high on arches over a valley, pale stone lifted into the sky like a held breath. Sometimes it disappears into the hillside, becoming a secret corridor where cool darkness keeps the water calm. And always, always, it keeps the same quiet promise. Never rush, never waste, never lose the way. There is wonder in that contradiction. To hold a river aloft, above fields, above roads, above the slow wandering of animals, and yet keep it from becoming wild. To persuade water to travel for miles, even days, and arrive still gentle, still clear, still patient. It is easy to imagine strength as force, but the aqueduct teaches another kind, strength as steadiness. A slight slope, almost imperceptible, guides the flow, a fall so small it feels like mercy. The channel becomes a stone vein, carrying life with unbroken calm. Inside, the water slides along mineral walls, gathering faint traces of the earth, coolness, softness, a hint of the hill's own breath. Sometimes, in the deeper chambers, the air is cold enough to raise gooseflesh. You can picture it, an inspection room carved from rock, damped walls glistening like dark glass, a narrow stream passing through the middle like a silver thread drawn tight. No human voices, only the continuous hush of movement, only the gentle echo of droplets falling somewhere farther down, like slow punctuation in a long sentence. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. If you listen long enough, you begin to hear the aqueduct not as architecture, but as ritual, a sacred practice repeated in stone. The builders would have known this rhythm intimately. The morning inspection, the clearing of debris, the checking of walls for cracks, for roots, for subtle shifts, the careful sealing of seams, the quiet pride of keeping a promise alive. And because humans cannot live inside pure function for long, myth drifts in like incense. It is said, so the old stories murmur, that springs have guardians, not always fierce, not always visible, sometimes only a feeling at the edge of the water, as if the source is watched, a presence that demands respect, a hush that suggests you should not shout here. Whispers tell us that some aqueducts were guided by spirits of place, nymphs in the reeds, old gods in the stone, protectors who walked unseen along the route at night. That if the builders listened, truly listened, the water would show them where it wished to go. That a wrong route would feel heavy in the body, and a right route would feel strangely light, as if the hills themselves were offering passage. Marked by the moon, some say, the best intakes were chosen, not because moonlight changes water, but because moonlight changes people. It softens the world. It quiets ambition. It makes you more likely to notice the faint shimmer of a hidden spring, the dampness of a shaded rock face, the way mist gathers where water is patient and deep. And so, across the sleeping hills, the aqueduct continues. At times it emerges into daylight as a procession of arches, wide, solemn, and strangely tender, each arch leaning into the next like companions. The stone is sun-warmed at noon, then cooled by evening. Dust gathers in corners, forming spiral drifts that seem to repeat the water's own slow turning. And under overcast skies, the arches appear even more ancient, like bones of a gentle giant resting across the landscape. And when fog rises in the valley below, the lower world disappears, leaving the aqueduct floating above whiteness, as if it has climbed into dream. Yet, even here, high above earth, the water does not hurry. It continues as it began, calm, obedient, unwavering, a river held aloft, yet never rushing. And then, the greatest mystery of all. It vanishes, not gone, only hidden. The channel slips into the hillside, into darkness, into cool stone corridors where sound becomes soft and direction becomes faith. Here, the aqueduct is no longer a monument for eyes, but a secret for the body of the city, a buried artery, a silent benefactor. Beneath the silence, the city sleeps above it. Roofs and temples and narrow streets lie under pale fog. Lanterns extinguish one by one. Dogs curl into doorways. Even the markets, so loud by day, become still. And below, in the unseen veins, water moves. It arrives without spectacle. No celebration, no applause, only a quiet presence filling cisterns, feeding fountains, readying the morning's first blessing. Continuity, offered night after night, the same patient delivery, the same promise kept in darkness. If you could place your ear to the ground at the city's edge, if the world were quiet enough, you might hear it, a faint murmur beneath stone. Not speech, not song, but something older, the sound of arriving, the sound of being carried, the hands that followed gravity like a prayer. And what of those hands? Their names, mostly, are lost. The great emperors remain written, their monuments loud with memory, but the builders of water, those who measured slopes, who cut tunnels, who sealed channels so carefully that the flow remained calm, often vanish into the background of history like mist into morning. Perhaps that is fitting, because the aqueduct itself is not a shout, it is a whisper that lasts. It is said that true greatness does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply continues. And as the night deepens, as the hills remain asleep beneath their fog, the water keeps moving, thin, silver, steady, a line that knows the way, a pilgrim guided by a slope so gentle it feels like kindness. In the end, there is no clear conclusion, only the ongoing hush, only the city breathing above, unaware of the river beneath. Only continuity, mysterious, faithful, enduring. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was always meant to be felt. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And if you listen now, softly, without strain, you may notice the faintest sound, like a lullaby under stone. Water going home. At twilight, when the day loosens its grip and the world begins to speak in softer languages, a road stretches towards the horizon. It does not announce itself. It simply lies there, stone upon stone, worn smooth by centuries of breath. The last light of evening slides across its surface like a slow hand, touching every rounded edge, every seam filled with dust. Here and there, small blades of grass rise between the stones, delicate as eyelashes, and still the road holds its line. It is said that some paths are made for travel, and others are made for memory, but this one feels made for something quieter than both, as if it was built with the calm intention of outlasting the very idea of who built it, as if it was laid down not only across land, but across time, an oath pressed into the earth. Who laid a path meant to outlast memory? If you stand at its beginning, perhaps beneath a half-collapsed archway that once framed arrivals like a gate, you can feel the invitation in the air. The stones are cool, the shadows lengthen, the sky turns dusk blue, and the first star appears, a small, bright witness. Beneath the silence, the road waits, not impatiently, patiently, as though it expects you to walk slowly, to match its tempo, to let your thoughts become lighter with each step you do not take too quickly. So we begin, not with haste, but with a measured drifting of attention. The first thing you notice is alignment. A road like this is not merely placed, it is decided. Every stone seems to have agreed with the next, each edge fitted as if by instinct, as if the earth itself preferred this order. The line of it is so confident that it feels like quiet authority. Even when it bends, it does so with purpose, never wandering, never forgetting where it is going. The Romans understood the sacredness of straightness, not because nature is straight, nature curves, sways, spirals, but because straightness is a vow. To draw a line across wild land and keep it true is to promise something, that distance can be tamed without being harmed, that travelers can be guided without being controlled, that the world can be connected without being shouted over. We are used to thinking of Roman engineers as conquerors with tools, but here, in the hush of twilight, they appear differently. They become pilgrims of distance, men who learned to read hills like scripture, men who measured with strings and shadows, with simple instruments that obeyed gravity and light, men who listened, yes, listened to the ground, searching for firmness, for stability, for the hidden places where water would undermine stone. They did not lay a road by force alone, they laid it by consent, consent of terrain, consent of slope, consent of what could bear weight without complaint. Whispers tell us that before the first stones were set, there were rituals of surveying that felt almost like prayer. A stake driven into earth, a line drawn taut, a plumb bob hanging in still air, pointing to truth by surrender. And above, the sky, a ceiling of slow-moving stars, turning like a silent wheel. Some routes were traced beneath constellations, as if direction needed celestial blessing. Marked by the moon, the line would be tested again and again, until it felt inevitable. Then came the body of the road, not just the surface you see, but the hidden layers beneath, like a secret architecture of persistence. Where memory fades, the earth still holds the evidence. Deep foundation stones, then gravel, then sand, then the fitted paving blocks, each layer a quiet promise that rain, frost, hooves, wheels, and centuries would come, and the road would endure. This endurance is its first mystery, not dramatic, not loud, just steady, because empires fade, flags are lowered, languages change, temples crumble, names dissolve like ink in water, and yet the road remains. Walk along it, in your imagination, slowly. Let the stones pass beneath your awareness like beads of a rosary. Each one has been touched, stepped on, ignored, admired, and forgotten. Each one has heard different footsteps in different eras. sandals and boots, carts and animals, then silence, then perhaps modern shoes, and then silence again. And still the stones do not complain. They keep their place. There is something tender in that. As if the road has learned a kind of mercy to hold the weight of passing lives without demanding to be remembered in return. At certain points, you find a milestone, or what remains of one, a cylindrical stone lying on its side, eroded nearly smooth. Any inscription, if it ever existed, is now a ghost. Lichen paints it with pale greens. Dust gathers in its cracks like slow snow. Sometimes a faint spiral carving remains, or a moon-like curve worn into the surface by time. It is said that these markers once spoke clearly, distances, names, destinations, but time is a patient thief. Now the milestone speaks in a different way, not with letters, but with presence. It says, someone once cared enough to measure this. Someone once believed that distance could be made gentle. And then the crossroads, a place where the road splits, where direction becomes a choice. Legends speak of secret rites performed at such intersections, not necessarily grand ceremonies, nothing theatrical, but small acts, quiet gestures, a pinch of salt, a drop of oil, a whispered blessing for travelers, a moment of stillness, as if the world itself held its breath while a path was decided. Beneath the silence, crossroads feel different, even now. Because a crossroads is not only a meeting of roads, it is a meeting of possible lives. One direction leads to one kind of dawn, another direction to another. And in ancient times, when travel was slower, riskier, and more final, choosing a road could feel like choosing a fate. So the stories grew, guardian spirits of direction, small invisible watchers who kept travelers from losing their way, spirits who walked the road at night keeping it straight in dream, spirits who lived in the dust spirals that gather at the edges, turning and turning as if remembering the footsteps of the past. Are these stories true? Perhaps not in the way we usually mean truth, but they reveal something real, the reverence people felt for a path that stayed. Because the road did not only carry bodies, it carried continuity. Consider the road crossing a marshland, lifted slightly above reeds and shallow water. Mist rises there at dusk, softening the world until everything feels oceanic, like land and sky are dissolving into one another. The stones glisten with moisture, the reflections tremble, and the road, so firm, so sure, becomes a thin, steady bridge through uncertainty. Or imagine the road clinging to a mountain pass, retained by a low wall of fitted stone. Wind brushes the slope, clouds drag their shadows across the rock face. Here, the road feels like stubborn grace, refusing to vanish even where the land seems determined to shake it off. And then, somewhere along the way, you reach ruins. A roadside station, perhaps, once a place of rest, of lamps and water and simple food. Now it is broken arches and scattered pottery shards, star-marked roof tiles half buried in dust. The courtyard is empty. No voices, no warmth, only the shape of shelter left behind, like a memory of hospitality. And still, outside those ruins, the road continues. That is the gentle riddle at the center of it all. Buildings fall, walls crumble, names vanish, but the path remains, as if the road is less a human artifact and more a decision the land itself has chosen to keep, as if the stones have grown roots, not literal roots, but roots of meaning, a line that refuses to be erased because too many journeys have passed along it, too many hopes, too many returns, too many departures whispered into its dust. In some places, the road is swallowed by forest. Leaves gather, moss creeps between seams, tree roots lift stones slowly, carefully, as if even the forest is reluctant to break the vow. Under diffused sunbeams, the stones appear and disappear, present, then hidden, like a thought half remembered in a dream. Where memory fades, the road learns another kind of endurance, the endurance of being forgotten and still existing. It becomes a thing you stumble upon rather than seek, a sudden line of ancient stones under your feet, a soft shock of recognition in the body. Because even if you do not know its name, the road speaks to something ancient in you, the longing to be guided, the comfort of a line that holds steady through darkness. And so we come to the closing reflection. The light has thinned, the sky has deepened, night has taken its seat quietly at the edge of the world. The road stretches onward, past the reach of sight, into mist and distance. Grass grows between stones, dew gathers on their edges. The seams fill with dust that curls in spirals when the wind is gentle. And still the road remembers, not with words, with persistence. It invites the listener not to hurry, not to arrive, not even to understand fully, only to rest within its patient continuity, to feel how something can remain without demanding attention, to learn, perhaps, that the truest structures are not always the tallest or loudest, but the ones that continue to offer direction long after their makers have become silence. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in any final way. Perhaps the road's purpose was always simpler, to endure, to guide, to hold the possibility of onward movement in a world that changes. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And if you listen now, very softly, you may hear it beneath the night, not footsteps, not carts, not the clatter of history, but the quiet, unwavering presence of a path that refused to vanish. The night is not finished yet. It lingers in the air like velvet smoke, and the world moves more slowly, as if time itself has softened. Somewhere within this quiet, where streets sleep, where distant hills are only darker shapes against the sky, there is a dome cradling moonlight. A hollow stone bowl turned upward. Its curve gathers the silver glow and holds it without spilling, the way a cupped hand holds water. High above, an opening, an oculus, frames the night like a single perfect eye. Through it, the sky looks closer than it should, and one bright star sits in the center, steady as a vow. It is said that some places do not merely shelter the body, they shelter the mind. They take wandering thoughts and gather them into stillness. Standing beneath this dome, imagined or remembered, you feel something that is difficult to name, the sensation of being held by stone and watched by sky at the same time. A question rises, gentle as breath. How did the sky agree to be held? Beneath the silence, The answer does not arrive quickly. It drifts in like mist. It asks you to slow down, to let your attention become quiet enough to notice the way the curve speaks. Because a vault is not only architecture, it is a kind of listening. We enter the chamber not through noise, not through spectacle, but through shadow. The air inside is cooler, older. It smells faintly of mineral dust and time. Each sound you make is immediately softened, as if the building does not wish to keep it. The floor beneath your feet is worn smooth by centuries of passing, and the walls curve in a way that feels less like construction and more like a decision made by the earth itself. Roman builders learned to curve space, not only to enclose it, but to calm it, to shape silence into shelter. They discovered, slowly, patiently, that stone could be taught to carry weight in ways that felt almost impossible. That what seems heavy can become gentle if it is arranged with care. That a curve is a negotiation between force and harmony. A vault is a held breath, a pause between earth and stars. Think of the simplest vault first. A barrel vault, a long stone arch stretched into a tunnel. In the dimness, it resembles a ribcage of masonry, protecting a hidden heart of air. It is ancient, sacred in its repetition, curve after curve, each one agreeing to support the next. Beneath it, the mind becomes quiet, lulled by the steady rhythm of stone. Then, deeper into wonder, the groin vault, two barrel vaults crossing, their lines meeting like rivers that do not clash but blend, and beyond that, the dome, a vault turned inward upon itself, an infinite arch that circles back to its beginning. Each form is a different kind of hush. Each one teaches the same lesson. Weight can be made to behave. But how? How does immense mass float in calm balance as if it has forgotten gravity's demand? The Romans would have answered with measure, with geometry, with the careful obedience of materials. Yet the way they worked also feels like something else, a ritual of attention. Before the first bricks rose, there were tools laid out like sacred objects, compasses and straight edges, plumb lines that found truth by surrendering. There were lines drawn in dust, circles traced on stone. There were wooden centering frames, temporary skeletons that held the shape of the future while the masonry learned how to hold itself. In torch-lit corners, curved bricks waited like sleeping crescents. Mortar bowls sat still, clay red and heavy, holding the paste that would become invisible strength. A compass, faded copper, worn smooth, rested on a slab as if it had been placed there with reverence. Nothing hurried, everything prepared. Whispers tell us that certain proportions were never spoken aloud in crowded places, that sacred geometry was treated like a living thing, passed quietly from master to apprentice, mouth to ear, never fully written, never fully claimed, not because it was mystical in the simple sense, but because it demanded humility. A dome is not forgiving. A vault remembers every careless choice. Where memory fades, the stones keep their own record. The Romans learned to lighten what should have been too heavy. They changed materials as the vault rose, using denser stone below and lighter mixtures above. They shaped the thickness so the dome could carry itself, narrowing toward the top like a thought becoming simpler as it rises. They carved coffers, recessed squares stepping inward, not merely for beauty, but to reduce mass, to let the structure breathe. And all of it, every choice, served a single quiet purpose: to persuade weight to become calm. Inside the dome, that persuasion feels complete. The space is not oppressive, it is gentle. It wraps you without pressing. The curve draws your gaze upward, not with command, but with invitation. The oculus above is a circle of night, and moonlight falls through it like a slow ribbon, drifting from one part of the floor to another as the hours pass. Dust motes float in that light, turning in small spirals, as if the air itself is thinking. You realize then that the building does not only hold stone and sky, it holds time, it holds breath, it holds the echo of countless moments that came before.
Long ago, footsteps would have sounded here, sandals on stone, the low murmur of voices. But even those sounds have been softened by centuries. Now, the dominant presence is silence. A silence that is not empty, but full of the memory of work, of intention, of careful hands that shaped an impossible curve. And the myths come, as they always do, when humans encounter something that feels too perfect to be merely practical. It is said that domes were designed to mirror the heavens, that the oculus was not just an opening for light and smoke, but a sacred eye, an agreement between human shelter and celestial watchfulness, that to stand beneath such a vault was to stand inside a model of the universe with the sky placed carefully at the center. Marked by the moon, some claim, certain measurements were chosen, not because the moon commands stone, but because the moon changes the way builders see. Under moonlight, edges soften, curves reveal themselves. The world becomes a place of gradients, not harsh lines. A dome imagined beneath moonlight might feel more like a natural shape, like a shell, like a planet, like a hill than a human invention. And perhaps that is the deepest mystery. The best vaults do not feel built, they feel discovered, as if the builders found a shape that already existed in the logic of the world and simply gave it stone. The contradiction hums softly inside the chamber. You can sense the weight above you, immense, unyielding, older than any single life. And yet it does not threaten. It floats in balance. The forces travel through the curve and settle into the walls, then down into the earth, distributed like a whispered secret shared among many listeners. This is the quiet genius of the vault. It does not fight gravity, it conducts it, like a choir conducting breath into song. Outside, empires fade. Outside, streets change, languages shift, names disappear. But within this curve, something remains constant, the feeling of being held. Sometimes time breaks the vault, an earthquake, a fire, the slow creep of water into hidden seams. A section collapses, revealing layers like exposed bones, brick, mortar, stone. Dust drifts in sun-ray shafts. The ruin is still beautiful, still sacred in its honesty. Even broken, the curve teaches. Because even in collapse, the vault shows how it once carried itself. And perhaps the builders knew this too, that nothing lasts forever, but some things last long enough to feel like forever to those who pass through them. Now the echoes fade even further, the imagined footsteps vanish, the myths soften into pure atmosphere. You are left beneath the dome, alone with the simplest elements: stone, air, light,
and the listening sky. The question returns now, gentler, with no sharp edges. How did the sky agree to be held? Perhaps it was never an agreement at all. Perhaps the sky was always willing, so long as it was framed with reverence, so long as it was not trapped but invited. An oculus is not a cage, it is a window left open, a promise that the heavens may enter and leave freely. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and if you listen now, you may notice that the dome has its own voice, not words, not sound exactly, but a presence that feels like a held breath, a pause, a softness. The curve above you has no beginning and no end. It does not point, it surrounds. It asks nothing of you except stillness. Outside, the night begins to pale toward morning. The star in the oculus dims. The moonlight thins, replaced by a faint, gentle gray. Mist gathers in the high spaces, and the dome seems to exhale, filling itself with a softness that blurs distance and quiets thought. Beneath the silence, you realize the true gift of the vault. Not that it conquered space, but that it made space feel safe enough to rest inside. And so the chapter ends the way it began, without conclusion, without certainty, only with wonder. You remain under the listening sky, wrapped in a question with no edges, only curve and quiet. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was only meant to be felt, like moonlight in a stone bowl, like breath held gently, like sleep arriving without announcement. Mist rises from a river as if the water is exhaling. Not in a hurry, never in a hurry, just a slow release into the cool air of early morning. The surface is dark, and the mist moves across it in soft layers, folding and unfolding like pale cloth. The world beyond is muted, trees reduced to gentle silhouettes, stones softened into shadow, the sky a dim blue-gray that has not yet decided to brighten. And then, through that drifting veil, a bridge appears. Ancient stone, lifted over the river in a line of arches like sleeping ribs. The shape is so steady, so calm, that it feels less like something built and more like something revealed, like a truth the mist has been keeping and finally chooses to show. It is said that there are places where the boundary between moments grows thin, where the past does not feel behind you and the future does not feel ahead, where time simply listens. This is such a place. Beneath the silence, the bridge waits, and the question arrives as gently as fog. What does it mean to cross? Between banks? Between eras? Between versions of the world? The first step is always the strangest, even when you do not take it. You can stand at the riverbank and feel the bridge like an invitation. The stones at its threshold are worn smooth, polished not by one lifetime, but by many. Small reeds lean at the edge of the water. A half-buried milestone rests in the silt nearby, its face eroded until any inscription has become a whisper. Beside it, only in the mind's eye perhaps, a blank scroll tied with faded copper cord, as if someone once tried to record this crossing and found no words that could hold it. Where memory fades, the stone remains, and that is the bridge's first mystery, its quiet refusal to disappear. Roman builders are felt more than seen here. Their voices are gone, their names mostly scattered like dust, but their attention still lingers in the architecture. You can sense it in the careful alignment of blocks, in the curve of each arch, in the way the bridge meets the bank with a firmness that feels respectful rather than forceful. They built in dialogue with water's patience, because water, too, is an ancient teacher.
It does not fight stone head on. It surrounds. It waits. It returns again and again, shaping what it touches through repetition, through persistence, through time. To build above a river is to accept the river's slow authority, to admit that floods will come, that winters will harden the air, that summers will swell the current, that debris will press against piers like wandering thoughts. And still, to build, to place stone into a world that moves. The Romans understood arches the way sailors understand stars, not as decoration, but as guidance through danger. An arch is a promise made in curve. It holds weight by sharing it, by spreading it outward into its supports, by turning gravity into a quiet flow. Look closely at the bridge's parapet. The coping stones along the top are worn down, softened by weather and touch. In places, faint star marks appear, small carved points half erased, a crescent-like scratch, a moon-worn symbol that might have been intentional or might have been time's own handwriting. Lichen gathers in pale green patches. Water droplets bead along the edge and catch what little light the morning offers. These small details feel intimate, as if the bridge, for all its size, is made of countless tiny moments. It is said, whispers tell us, that bridges were more than structures. They were gates, because a bridge is a threshold you cannot ignore. A road can be wandered off. A field can be crossed anywhere. But a river demands decision. It narrows your options until you stand before a single path and choose to step onto it. And where there is a threshold, folklore plants its guardians, unseen keepers, silent watchers, spirits of passage. Some stories say a bridge must be greeted. Some say it must be thanked. Some say a candle should be lit at the abutment, not for spectacle, but for respect, because the river is alive, and the crossing is a negotiation. Beneath the silence, you can almost believe it. At the base of the bridge, tucked into a shadowed niche, there may be a small hollow built into the stone. A bowl might sit there, empty now, holding only ash and dust spirals. A faded copper lamp might rest beside it, unlit, its presence suggesting that once, long ago, someone marked the crossing with a ritual so small it barely disturbed the air. And perhaps that is all the keepers ever wanted. Not fear, not drama, only awareness, because awareness is what makes a crossing sacred. Now drift your attention beneath the central arch, close to the waterline. The underside curves overhead like a vault, a stone sky mirroring the real one above. Reflections tremble on the soffit, where the river's surface flickers. Sound changes here. Every drop, every small lap of stone against water becomes an echo that lingers a fraction longer, as if the bridge is listening to the river speak. An oceanic feeling rises in the chest, even in a narrow stream. Because the river is never only here, it is connected, upstream to hidden springs and distant rains, downstream to wide estuaries and salt horizons. It carries stories the way it carries leaves,
without choosing, without judging. And the bridge, in its stillness, receives them all. Floods have come here. You can see the proof if you look at the piers, dark stains higher up where water once climbed, leaving its memory behind. Driftwood may be caught against the stone, wedged in a crevice like a forgotten offering. The river, swollen and powerful, may swirl in slow spirals when it is angry, testing the bridge's resolve. And yet the arches stand, unmoved, not because they are arrogant, but because they were shaped to cooperate with force, to let water pass beneath without catching it like a net, to let pressure move through the curve and settle into the earth. The contradiction hums softly, a thing so heavy surviving in a world that never stops moving. In that hum, time begins to feel strange, because the bridge is not only a crossing over water, it is a crossing over centuries. Imagine, without forcing the mind, what has passed here. Dawn after dawn, fog like this fog lifting from the river, seasons turning, leaves falling, ice forming in thin skins along the bank, summer heat shimmering above the stones, quiet feet, busy feet, wheels, hooves, then quiet again, then new feet in a new era, carrying different languages in their mouths, different worries in their chests, yet stepping on the same worn stones. Empires fade, the bridge remains, and on certain mornings, marked by the moon still hanging pale in the sky while the sun begins to rise, it can feel as if time crosses itself here, as if the past and present meet mid-span, not colliding, but overlapping like two layers of mist. Stand, in imagination, at the center of the bridge. The fog rolls across the deck like slow breath. The stone underfoot is polished by countless crossings, its surface smooth in places, rough in others where repairs have been made. One paving stone bears a faint star mark, so faint you might miss it unless you look with patience. Dust has gathered in seams, turning into small spirals where the wind has gently practiced its art. And something subtle happens. The ends of the bridge, both ends, fade, not literally, but visually, as fog thickens in either direction. You cannot see the far bank clearly. You cannot see the near bank clearly either. For a moment, direction disappears. You are suspended, a crossing with no urgency, a pause between places, a held breath. This is the bridge where time crossed itself, because here you are not quite arriving, not quite leaving, you are simply between. The river below continues, indifferent and faithful. The sky above listens, pale and wide. The stone around you holds its curve, and your thoughts, if they have been loud, begin to soften, because bridges have a way of teaching the nervous mind a gentle truth, that you can be held while you are in transition, that you can be safe in the in-between. As the morning grows brighter, the mist thins, the bridge becomes clearer, more ordinary in shape, and yet the feeling remains, quiet, lingering, like a scent on cloth. In the final hush, time itself seems to pause mid-step, not forever, just long enough for you to notice, long enough for you to drift across, weightless, into reflection. Perhaps it was never meant to be solved, this mystery of endurance. Perhaps the bridge does not stand because it defeated the river, but because it listened to the river so well that the river allowed it to remain. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and if you listen now, very softly, you may hear it, Not the loudness of history, not the clamor of armies or the roar of conquest, but the quiet continuity of water beneath stone, and the gentle, unwavering presence of a crossing that still waits in mist, inviting you onward, inviting you inward, as sleep approaches like fog, slow, silver, and kind. A city emerges at night, the way a thought emerges in the space between waking and sleep. Not all at once, not with noise, but slowly, shape by shape, revealed by moonlight and fog. From above, it seems to be made of lines more than stone, straight streets cutting through darkness, crossings laid like quiet knots, squares and rectangles forming a calm lattice. The air is cool, the sky is deep dusk blue, and somewhere beyond the haze, stars hold their positions with patient certainty. It is said that some cities are built to impress the eye, and others are built to soothe the body. This one, this imagined Roman city, woven of measured shadows, feels like it was designed not to shout, but to guide. Its order is not harsh, it is gentle, like a lullaby played on strings that never snap. And the opening wonder arrives, soft as breath. How did order learn to feel gentle? Beneath the silence, the answer begins where all such answers begin, in the act of measuring the world without trying to dominate it. Picture a gate first, a sacred archway at the city's edge, partially collapsed now, its stones softened by centuries. It frames the beginning of a street so straight it seems to reach for the horizon. Moonlight brushes the threshold stones. Dust gathers in small spirals along the seam where road meets wall, as if the city itself has been turning in its sleep. Somewhere in the rubble, a faded copper hinge fragment glints, an almost forgotten spark of intention. Beyond the arch, the street disappears into fog. That vanishing is important, because what the city offers is not only a path, but a promise. You may enter, and you may be held. Roman planning begins with a cross, not a symbol of fear, but of orientation. Two main streets, the Cardo and the Decumanus, meeting like quiet rivers, dividing space into comprehensible parts. From that simple meeting, a grid spreads outward. It is not merely geometry, it is a loom, a calm instrument for weaving human life into the landscape. A loom does not create cloth by force. It creates it by repetition, by tension held at the right degree, by threads that accept their place beside other threads. So it was with the Roman grid, lines held steady, intersections repeated, blocks formed like measured breaths. The city becomes fabric, and within it there is room for everything that needs room. Room for breath, room for procession, room for rest. The Romans understood that humans move in patterns. They walk, they gather, they trade, they worship, they return home. The grid does not erase those patterns. It gives them channels, quiet, reliable. It turns chaos into something navigable, like a night sky made readable by constellations. Whispers tell us that some alignments were chosen with the stars in mind, not always in a mystical sense, though myth loves to gather around straight lines, but in a practical reverence for direction, the rising sun, the prevailing winds, the slope of the land, the need for water to flow gently, unbroken, towards cisterns and fountains. And yet, when you look at an ordered street under a starry sky, it is easy to feel that the city is listening upward, that it has placed its avenues like quiet questions under the heavens. Marked by the moon, the stones seem to shine at certain corners, as if the city remembers where the light falls best. We drift deeper. A forum-like plaza opens in the heart of the grid, a rectangle of paving stones laid with careful discipline. Even in ruin, the lines remain. A dry fountain basin sits at the center, holding only shadows and a faint reflection of starlight. Columns stand or lie broken, their rhythms still visible in the spacing, the repetition, the implied architecture of what once surrounded this space. The forum is where the city's voice once gathered, and there is melancholy in knowing that voice is now dust. Not because the city failed, but because all cities eventually become quieter than their founders imagined. Laughter fades, arguments dissolve, the footsteps of merchants and children become echoes, then become silence. The stone remains, and the air above it continues to move indifferent and gentle. Where memory fades, the grid persists, and in that persistence a softer mystery appears, strict lines giving rise to human warmth. Because the Roman grid was never only an instrument of control, it was also an act of care. Straight streets allowed light and wind to move through the city. Regular blocks made it possible to build homes and shops and courtyards with a sense of predictability, an ease of navigation that comforts the nervous mind. Drainage could be planned, water channels could be guided, the city could breathe. Imagine an insula, an apartment block, standing within its block like a quiet hive. Window openings stacked above one another, arches and lintels repeated, rusted hooks where laundry once hung, now green with oxidation. The walls are broken, but you can still sense the lives that once nested there. Meals prepared, lamps lit, conversations softened at night. The grid held them all, not by trapping them, but by making space. And beneath that space, there were other spaces, hidden ones.
Vaulted baths where steam rose like pale fog, where water arrived through unseen channels and pooled in basins with the calm patience of a ritual. In ruins now, the bathhouse still holds its curve. Moonlight slips through a broken oculus and lands on mosaic fragments like scattered stars. Mineral crust glitters faintly at the edge of an empty pool. Silence lives here, but it is not lonely. It is ceremonial. The city is full of such chambers, places designed for the body to slow down, for the mind to quiet, for warmth to be shared, for rest to be possible even in an ordered world. And then, beyond the baths, a theater, a semicircle of stone seats, partially buried, filled with fog. From above, it looks like a spiral shell, oceanic in its curve, as if the city carried not only straightness, but also the knowledge of circles. The straight streets lead to curved gathering spaces. The grid gives way to the amphitheater's embrace. Here is the contradiction again. Lines and curves, discipline and softness, structure and warmth. The Romans were often remembered for their strictness, their measurements, their laws, but a city is not only law, it is also the quiet allowance of human life, messy, tender, unpredictable. The grid did not prevent that, it held it gently, like a bowl holding water. And all the while, beneath the city, water moved.
through channels and pipes, through conduits fed by distant aqueducts, through the hidden veins that made fountains possible. In one street, a narrow stone conduit disappears underground. Its lip is wet, reflecting faint stars. Even at night, even in ruin, the idea of water remains. Continuity, patience, the slow movement of life beneath stone. It is said that a city is not only what is seen, it is what flows beneath. In the distance, the streets continue in their perfect alignment, but fog softens them, corners blur, buildings dissolve into mist. The grid becomes less a map and more a feeling, an order that exists even when the objects are gone, like a melody remembered without hearing the instrument. And now the chapter begins to close. Shadows lengthen, not because anything moves quickly, but because night deepens in its gentle way. Moonlight stretches across paving stones, turning the grid into a woven pattern of light and darkness. Measured shadows lay themselves down like threads. The city becomes cloth again, fabric made of silence.
The melancholy returns, but it is not sharp. It is soft, like the ache of loving something that cannot stay, because the city's voice is dust. And yet, the city is not entirely gone. Its geometry remains as a faint glow in the mind, a memory of alignment, a proof that order can be kind, that straight lines can create shelter rather than severity, that a planned world can still hold warmth, laughter, rest. Beneath the silence, the city exhales. You can almost feel it, an invisible release, as if the stones have been holding a breath for centuries and are now letting it go. Slowly, without sound. The grid of memory lingers, glowing faintly in the dark, then fading, then returning like the afterimage of starlight when you close your eyes. Perhaps it was never meant to be preserved in full. Perhaps it was only meant to teach a quiet lesson, that what we build with attention can outlast our names, that measured shadows can become a home. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and if you listen now, very softly, you may hear the city's last gift, not a clamor, not a command, but a calm arrangement of space, inviting your thoughts to settle into their own gentle alignment until the grid becomes dream, and the streets become silence, and the night holds you the way the city once did, patiently, quietly, and without asking anything in return.
Under a pale moon, stone seats curve like a sleeping shell. The amphitheater lies open to the night, its oval form cradling darkness the way a bull cradles water. Fog drifts in and settles along the tiers, softening the hard geometry into something almost tender. The stone is old, older than any single voice that once filled it, and yet it holds a peculiar freshness in moonlight, as if the night itself is washing it clean. It is said that certain places do not forget, not because they have minds, but because they have shape, because sound, once released, leaves a faint trace in the places that were built to receive it. And so we begin with an invitation that feels like listening. What dreams still linger where crowds once breathed as one? At the edge of the amphitheater, the entrances yawn like quiet mouths, arched corridors leading inward. In the darkness of a tunnel, the air cools. Stone walls narrow the world into a single direction. Your footsteps, even imagined, would soften quickly here, swallowed by the curve and the dust. Torchlight once lived along these walls, casting shadows that moved like slow water. Now the sconces are empty, and the shadows remain only as a suggestion, an echo of light, not light itself. Beneath the silence, the amphitheater waits, not as a ruin that begs to be pitied, but as a sleeping instrument, an ancient body designed to hold breath, to shape pause, to gather sound and return it transformed. Step slowly into the open. The seating rises in careful rings. Each tier is a measured step in a long ascent. The rows curve and curve again, repeating the same gentle arc until the shape becomes oceanic, like ripples around a stone dropped into water long ago. In places, cracks run through the steps like thin rivers. Dust gathers in seams and forms tiny spirals where the wind has practiced its art. Lichen paints pale green stains on the stone, as if time has been quietly writing in a language of moss. Here and there, faint marks remain, a star scratched at a seat edge, a crescent-like groove worn into a corner. Not always intentional, not always readable, yet when you see them under moonlight, they feel like symbols left for no one in particular, as if the amphitheater and the sky have been exchanging secrets.
How did the Romans build a place that could hold so many voices and still make each one feel heard? Because this was never only a place of spectacle, it was a chamber for sound, a vessel for breath. Roman builders shaped acoustics as carefully as stone. They understood, through experience, through repetition, through attention, that sound moves like a living thing. It travels, it rebounds, it dissolves. It can be guided by curve and caught by angle. It can be softened by distance and sharpened by echo. So they carved a shell, a form that could gather the murmur of thousands and turn it into something coherent, something that could roll across tiers without breaking, like a slow wave that does not crash. Imagine the day the amphitheater was new, not in a loud way, no need to rush there, but in the quiet moment before the crowd arrives. The stone would have held sunlight. The sand of the arena floor would have been smooth, unmarked. The air would have been full of possibility, like an unlit lamp waiting for flame. Then the people came, and with them sound, a rising hum of conversation, the shuffle of feet, the creak of wood, the occasional laugh like a sudden spark, vendors calling softly, children whispering, 1,000 separate breaths blending into one living atmosphere, and above it all, the architecture listening. It is said, whispers tell us, that the amphitheater did not merely contain the crowd, it carried the crowd. It held them the way a cradle holds a sleeping child, by curve, by rhythm, by repetition.
The very act of sitting in those tiers, step after step after step, was a kind of ceremony, a gradual settling into a shared attention. And when the moment came, when a voice rose from below, the sound would travel upward, caught and shaped by the bowl of stone, not rushed, not scattered, guided. Even the pauses mattered. The Romans built for breath, for the tiny silences between words, for the held moment before applause, for the hush that falls when a crowd, without instruction, becomes still. Beneath the silence now, those pauses feel almost visible. They hang in the air like pale threads. Legends inevitably gather in such a place because humans cannot resist the idea that stone remembers. Some say that if you stand alone in the arena at night and speak a single word, the amphitheater will give it back with a different tone, as if it has colored your voice with all the voices that came before. Some say the tears keep every murmur trapped between their steps, like water held in shallow basins. Some say that on certain nights, marked by the moon, when fog lies thick and the wind is gentle, you can hear an audience that isn't there, the faintest suggestion of clapping, like distant rain. Are these stories true? Perhaps not in the way we usually demand truth, but they reveal a longing to believe that absence is not total, that what was once alive does not vanish completely, because the mystery here is not how the amphitheater carried sound. The deeper mystery is the one that rests in absence. Where did the voices go? Where did all that breath disappear to after the last performance ended, after the last crowd drifted away, after the empire thinned into history and the city's rhythms changed? The seats remained, the arches remained, the corridors remained. But the voices, those countless human signals, those laughter bursts and murmured prayers and shouted names, melted into time like mist at sunrise. Where memory fades, emptiness grows. And yet emptiness is not always empty. Look at the arena floor now. It is pale sand, perhaps, scattered with broken tile fragments, a half-buried bronze grate, a ring of wind-drawn spirals. The sand records the smallest movements, a fallen leaf, a drifting feather, the pattern of air. Even without people, the amphitheater is not still. It is always being touched by wind, by dust, by moonlight, by the slow seep of weather into stone. Under the seats there are chambers, service corridors and shadowed vaults that once carried supplies, animals, machinery, hidden workings that made the visible spectacle possible. In those low spaces, sound would have pooled differently, thickened by walls, softened by darkness. Now they hold a deeper hush, a kind of subterranean quiet, where you can almost feel the building breathing. In one wall you might find a small niche, a recessed alcove, a star-marked bowl sitting empty, holding only ash and dust. It looks like a shrine that has forgotten what it was for. Yet its presence suggests that even here, amid stone and public gathering, there was room for the sacred, for unseen gratitude, for a private gesture within a public space. Because the amphitheater, at its core, was never only entertainment, it was a ritual of attention, and rituals leave residue. Now time has broken parts of the shell. Some tiers have collapsed, stones fallen like waves that could no longer hold their shape. The broken edges reveal layered masonry beneath, brick, mortar, stone, an anatomy of endurance. Dust drifts down in slow sheets when the wind finds a crack. The ruin is not ugly, it is honest. It shows that even the strongest curve is still a curve inside time. And still the amphitheater remains recognizable. Still its shape holds, still it gathers silence. The night wind moves through the seats like a visitor who does not wish to disturb. Mist ribbons slide along the curved rows. Moonlight catches the edges of steps like silver thread, weaving the tiers into a faint pattern. If you sit, only in imagination, high on the uppermost row, you can look down into the oval and feel the distance like a soft drop. The empty arena becomes a quiet eye, open to the sky. Above the rim, one dim star hangs, and suddenly the title feels clear in the body. The amphitheater of echoing dreams. Because what remains here is not the sound itself. What remains is the architecture of listening. The shape that once caught voices now catches your thoughts. It holds them in a curve and returns them softened. It turns sharp memories into slow reflections. It makes the mind less angular. And as the chapter closes, the question becomes gentler, less urgent. Where did the voices go? Perhaps they became part of the wind.
Perhaps they dissolved into the dust spirals that gather between stones. Perhaps they rose through the open air, past the amphitheater's rim, and joined the listening sky. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, the amphitheater offers a different kind of echo, not sound, but calm, not applause, but hush, not spectacle, but the slow certainty that even when people vanish, the places shaped for breath still remember what breath felt like. In the end, only wind speaks, and the wind is careful here. It moves through the tiers as if turning pages in a book written without words. It touches the stone lightly, as if honoring what once happened. It carries away nothing essential, only a little dust, only the smallest grains of time. You are held in a cradle of echoes without sound. The seats curve around you like a sleeping shell. The arena rests below like a quiet eye. The moon thins toward morning, and the amphitheater, ancient, veiled, star-marked, continues to listen patiently as sleep approaches. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, the exact place where the voices went. Perhaps it is enough to know they once rose here, and that the stone, even now, still makes room for silence to be gentle. A solitary gate stands in the open night, not attached to a wall, not guarding a city, not closing anything in or keeping anything out. It rises alone from quiet ground, its stone pale under moonlight, its archway a hollow shape cut into darkness. Fog drifts low around its base, and the world beyond seems softened, as if the land itself is holding its breath. Through the opening, the night sky is framed like a painting. Stars, small, steady, ancient, rest in the arch's curve as though they belong there. A thin crescent moon hangs off to one side, and its light slides over the gate's worn edges, catching a faint star mark on the keystone, then slipping away.
It is said that some entrances are not merely entrances, they are questions, and the question arrives gently, like the hush before a candle is lit. Why were entrances also altars? Beneath the silence, the gate does not answer with words. It answers with stillness, an invitation to pause before you move, to notice that a threshold is never only a line on the ground. It is a moment, a breath, a decision that belongs as much to the heart as to the feet. The Romans understood thresholds deeply. They lived in a world of boundaries, between city and field, between home and street, between sacred and ordinary. And so they built arches, structures that could do two things at once. They could invite movement forward and yet ask the traveler to slow down. Stone that invites movement yet demands stillness. The contradiction glows softly in the moonlight, as if the gate itself enjoys holding both truths. Step closer. The threshold stones are worn smooth, polished by time and weather, by countless imagined footsteps. Dust has gathered in the seams, and where the wind is gentle, it forms tiny spirals, small, deliberate curls that look like a quiet script written by air. A sprig of grass pushes through a crack, delicate and stubborn, as if even life is curious about what lies beyond. The gate's surface bears scars of age, chisel marks softened by centuries, reliefs eroded into near abstraction, shapes that might once have been laurel wreaths, victories, processions. Now they are textures more than images, a language you feel rather than read. And in certain shadowed corners, faint celestial motifs remain, a star scratched into stone, a crescent curve, a pattern of dots that could be decoration or could be something else. Whispers tell us that symbols at thresholds were never only ornamental, they were protective, guiding, blessing. Because to pass through an arch was to cross from one state into another, even if only for a moment. And humans, always aware of unseen dangers, have long marked such crossings with ritual. Imagine then that at the base of this gate there once stood a small plinth, not grand, not announced, a simple stone platform holding a shallow bowl. Inside the bowl, dust and ash gathered in a spiral, as if the air itself had been turning an offering. Beside it, a blank scroll tied with faded copper cord. No writing, only the suggestion that something was meant to be recorded and could not be captured. Perhaps the ritual was as small as a touch, a palm pressed to stone, a whispered name, a moment of gratitude before stepping forward. It is said that the Romans honored not only gods of thunder and war, but gods of doorways, keepers of beginnings and endings. Janus, the double-faced guardian of thresholds, looking backward and forward at once, a deity of the in-between. And what is an arch if not a monument to the in-between? It stands there, curved and patient, asking you to remember that passage is a sacred act, that moving from one place to another is never purely physical. Something inside you crosses too. Beneath the silence, the gate seems to listen, not to voices, there are none, but to the movement of the world, the slow drift of fog, the faint shift of wind, the quiet turning of the sky. Stars slide almost imperceptibly from one side of the arch's frame to the other, and you realize that the gate is measuring time without trying to, that it has become a kind of instrument, an ancient device that holds the heavens in a stone outline, the gate that knew the stars. Perhaps it knew them not as knowledge in a mind, but as familiarity in a body. It has stood long enough to watch seasons change beneath the same constellations, long enough to see the moon wax and wane countless times, each cycle a soft return, long enough to understand, in its silent way, that the sky is not distant, it is present, it leans close, especially at night, especially when framed. A road approaches the gate, not a busy road now, just worn paving stones leading straight toward the arch, grass growing between seams, dew beading on edges. The road feels like a sentence that stops at the gate and waits. Beyond the opening, the land is fog and ambiguity. The gate does not reveal what lies ahead. It only offers the act of passing.
And this is where the mystery deepens, because an arch is usually built for somewhere, for a city entrance, for a bridge approach, for a triumphal way, for a boundary that matters. But this gate stands alone, leading nowhere and everywhere. So what is it doing here? Where memory fades, imagination begins to breathe. Perhaps this was once a marker, an edge of territory, a meeting place, a ceremonial point where travelers paused and were counted, where messages were received, where a new road began. Perhaps it belonged to a vanished wall. Perhaps it was part of a larger complex now swallowed by earth. Or perhaps it was always meant to be solitary, a pure threshold, a structure built to honor the moment of crossing itself. There are stories, soft and persistent, about rites performed beneath arches at night, about initiations and vows, about lovers meeting in secret, about soldiers returning from long roads and pausing under a date before entering home, letting their past fall away in the shadow of stone. Legends suggest that gates were watched by unseen keepers, not necessarily threatening, more like witnesses, spirits of passage who did not judge but observed, who ensured that the crossing was felt, not rushed, who reminded travelers that every beginning deserves a pause and every ending deserves respect. Marked by the moon, some crossings were believed to be more powerful because moonlight turns familiar things into symbols. It makes stone gleam like bone. It makes fog look like breath. It makes the mind more willing to believe that the world has layers and that the thin places, thresholds, arches, crossroads, might open into something we cannot name. If rain comes, the gate changes again. Water darkens the stone, making it shine faintly. Puddles gather at the threshold, and in those puddles the constellations appear, shimmering, broken, then whole again. The sky, reflected, becomes a second doorway beneath your feet. And you realize the gate does not only frame the heavens above, it invites the heavens into the earth. It ties up and down together in one quiet gesture. The contradiction returns, warmer now. Stone that asks you to move, and yet asks you to stop. A threshold that is open, and yet feels like an altar. A doorway that leads forward, and yet feels like a place to kneel. You can stand beneath the arch and feel the curve overhead like a held breath. The space inside the opening is different from the space outside, not visibly different, but emotionally, like stepping into a hush, like being wrapped in a soft pressure of attention. The gate does not demand belief, it asks nothing. And perhaps that is why it feels sacred, because it offers without insisting. It frames the sky without trying to own it. It holds the night without trying to trap it. And as the hours drift toward pre-dawn, the sky pales, the moon thins, stars fade one by one, not vanishing, only becoming invisible in the growing light. Fog shifts and loosens, slipping through the gate's opening like slow breath passing through ribs. Shadows lengthen, then soften. The gate remains, open, patient, leading nowhere and everywhere. As the chapter fades, the question also fades, not answered, but gentled. Why were entrances also altars? Perhaps because every crossing is a small rebirth. Perhaps because humans have always known, somewhere deep, that to move forward requires a moment of stillness, that thresholds deserve reverence, not for what they promise, but for what they make possible. The pause, the choice, the breath between worlds. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, the gate's echo is not sound, it is presence. A quiet frame around the listening sky, a doorway made of stone and patience, asking nothing, holding everything. And if sleep is approaching you now, as softly as fog, as gently as moonlight, then perhaps you can let yourself drift through that open arch without needing to know where it leads. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it has always been here, simply waiting, under the stars it knows so well, offering the calm gift of a threshold that does not hurry you at all.
Beneath every monument lies a quiet beginning, not the kind of beginning that arrives with trumpets or bright banners, but the kind that happens low to the ground, in dust and hush, where the earth is opened gently and asked to receive what will one day stand above it. The night is cool. Moonlight lies across a half-built site like pale silk, and in the center of it all, before columns rise, before arches learn their curve, there is a trench, a simple cut in the soil, an invitation to descend. It is said that the greatest structures are born twice, once in the mind as a line imagined, and once in the earth as a silence accepted. So we step closer to the trench, and the opening wonder arrives, soft as breath. Was strength born from reverence? The ground inside the trench is dark and damp, layered with clay red and sand beige, as if the land is showing its oldest colors. Dust lies along the edges in delicate spirals, shaped by wind and waiting. A few pottery shards rest there, broken mouths of vessels that once carried water or oil, and near them a small coin, faded copper, catches a thread of moonlight and holds it for a moment. A coin in the dirt feels like a contradiction. Money is made for hands and markets, for movement and exchange, yet here it lies, quiet, surrendered, no longer buying anything. It is said, whispers tell us, that before Roman builders placed stone, they placed meaning. They offered tokens to the unseen, not because the earth demanded payment, but because humans have always sensed that to build is to disturb. To cut into ground is to interrupt what was resting, and interruption, in old traditions, required acknowledgement. So offerings were made: dust, bone, coin, tokens of humility. Sometimes a small animal bone, clean and pale, placed carefully in a shallow pit lined with stones. Sometimes a handful of grain, sometimes a pinch of salt, sometimes a coin stamped with an emperor's face, now hidden where no one would see it again.
And sometimes, only in the imagination perhaps, a blank scroll sealed with wax, placed as if to say, "We do not know everything. We cannot predict the future, but we begin with respect." Beneath the silence, these gestures feel less like superstition and more like an ancient form of mindfulness, a way of slowing down at the threshold of creation, reminding the builders that what they raise will outlast them, and that the earth is not merely a surface to conquer. Above the trench, the site is marked by strings. Taut cords cross the ground like a geometric web. Stakes stand upright, quiet as reeds. A small star-marked weight rests near one intersection, as if the builders trusted both gravity and the sky. The lines are precise, but the mood is gentle. Even planning here feels like ritual. Where memory fades, these measured lines are among the first things to vanish. Yet for a moment, they are everything. They define the shape of what will become real. They turn open land into intention. And then, stone, the first course, the beginning of the beginning. A squared block rests near the edge of the trench, pale under moonlight, its surface rough with chisel marks. It waits like a patient animal. Mortar has been prepared, thick, clay red, smelling faintly of lime. Dust motes float above it, turning slowly in the air. You can almost see the moment the first stone is set. No workers are shown, no loud movement, only the implied lowering, the pause before contact. The block hovers just above the mortar bed. Shadows suggest torchlight without flame. The world holds its breath. And then the stone meets the earth, not as impact, but as settling, a gentle acceptance. This is the point where weight begins to belong. The Romans were masters of visible grandeur, arches spanning valleys, domes holding sky, roads cutting straight through distance. But all of that depended on what could not be seen, the careful darkness underfoot. Foundations were not an afterthought. They were the true conversation with time, because time attacks from below as much as from above. Water seeps, frost shifts soil, roots push, earthquakes whisper their warnings. The surface can be repaired, but the foundation must endure quietly, without applause. So the builders descended into trenches of memory and built with patience. They laid rubble and gravel and compacted layers, strata like a slow oath. They placed stones that interlocked, distributing weight the way a choir distributes breath. Sometimes they used concrete, opus caementicium, an invention that feels almost mythical, a mixture that hardens into stone itself, binding fragments into a single calm mass. It is said that in certain places, the best foundations were made with materials that seemed humble, broken fragments, pebbles, lime, things that had already been discarded. And yet, once combined and set, they became stronger than the sum of their pieces. There is a lesson hidden there. Strength does not always begin as something grand. Sometimes it begins as dust choosing to become solid. Beneath the structure, there are corridors, low, damp spaces where the air is cooler, where mineral crust glitters faintly on stone.
In these unseen passages, you might find a star-marked tile fragment fallen from above, resting beside a shallow puddle. The puddle holds a reflection, perhaps of a dim crescent moon, perhaps only of a pale patch of sky glimpsed through a crack. The underground feels like a different world, a world of slow echoes and patient darkness, and yet it is here that the monument's true stability lives.
The listener can feel the weight above and the silence below. The weight is not threatening, it is purposeful. It presses downward, yes, but the foundation receives it and spreads it, making the burden gentle. The silence below is not empty, it is working silence, a quiet labor that continues long after hands have left. Legends cling to this unseen realm. Some say foundation offerings were meant to appease spirits of place, guardians of soil and stone. Some say they were meant to bind the building's fate to the earth, to anchor it not only physically but spiritually. Some say that every great structure had a heart hidden beneath it, a coin, a bone, a small object placed like a seed. Marked by the moon, these offerings were sometimes set at night, when the world was quieter, when the act felt less like construction and more like communion. Whether or not these stories are literal, they speak to something real, the human desire to bless what will outlast us, to place a small piece of ourselves where no one will see it, so the future will be held by something more than stone. And then time moves forward, as it always does. Walls rise, columns lift, arches learn their curve, domes gather light. The monument becomes visible, impressive, named. People walk past it and look up, never thinking of what lies beneath. But the foundation remains, unseen, holding, listening. If erosion comes, if rain and wind slowly peel the earth away, you might glimpse the foundation line, the first stones, the compacted layers, the hidden coin tucked between blocks like a quiet secret. The sight can be strangely moving, like seeing the roots of a tree exposed. It reminds you that every towering thing is dependent on what is buried. Where memory fades, the ground keeps the truth. Now imagine pre-dawn. The sky pales from dusk blue toward sandstone yellow. The trench is still open in this moment of imagining, and a thin film of water in the bottom reflects a few fading stars. Strings still cross the site. A single coin glints faintly in wet soil, then dulls as light changes. The world begins to wake. And yet the most important work here has already been done, quietly, in darkness, with dust and humility. In the final reflection, the foundations hold. They hold the weight of stone above, the weight of years ahead, the weight of everything that will happen around the monument. Festivals and wars, markets and silences, laughter and collapse, forgetting and rediscovery. They teach, without words, that what endures often rests in darkness, that the most faithful supports are unseen, that reverence can be structural. Perhaps it was never meant to be noticed, this beginning beneath the beginning. Perhaps the offerings were not meant to be found. Perhaps they were simply meant to remind the builders and us
that permanence is not only a matter of engineering, it is also a matter of attitude, a willingness to kneel at the edge of a trench, a willingness to place something precious into dust and walk away. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, the echo is not a sound from above, it is the hush below, the quiet depth under every monument, the sacred dust that holds the world up. And as sleep approaches, like fog settling into a hollow, you can let the thought drift gently through you, that even in your own life, the strongest things may be the ones no one sees, foundations laid in darkness, held in silence, enduring quietly beneath it all. The night has stretched long and quiet, and the stars have had time to settle into their places. Across an open plain, ruins lie scattered like the softened bones of a dream, broken arches, toppled columns, fragments of walls that once held laughter and law. Fog pools low among them, moving in slow folds, as if the earth is exhaling after a long, heavy day. It is said that empires do not always end with fire. Sometimes they end with silence. Sometimes they fold inward, gradually, the way a tired body folds into sleep. And so the closing journey opens here, under stars, among stones that have stopped trying to be anything more than what they are. The empire is not gone, not entirely. It has simply become quiet. Its vastness has softened. Its edges have blurred into mist. Beneath the silence, a question does not demand an answer. It only drifts. What does it mean for power to fall asleep? We begin not with a date, not with a proclamation, but with the feeling of what remains. A fragment of stone in the foreground bears a faint star mark, an old scratch, a tiny constellation carved by a hand that is now dust. Around it, dust gathers in spirals where the wind has gently practiced its craft. The ground is sand beige, touched with clay red, and the fog turns everything into watercolor softness, as if the world is trying to be kinder to what is broken. If you listen closely, there is no voice, no crowd, no command, only the hush that follows after centuries of movement. Roman engineering, once the language of expansion, becomes in this night a lullaby of stone, not the bright, triumphant story told in marble inscriptions, but a quieter story told in what continues to exist without needing attention. Roads that still point, aqueducts that still arc, vaults that still hold air, foundations that still press against earth with patient trust. Power expressed through patience. That is the gentle contradiction that settles here like mist. Because patience is not the first word we usually attach to empire. We imagine speed, conquest, the snap of banners. But if you stand among ruins under stars, you can feel that the most enduring Roman acts were not acts of shouting. They were acts of listening, to gravity, to water, to distance, to weather, to time. A road appears first, a pale line under moonlight. Its stones are worn smooth, grass growing between seams like soft stitching. Dew beads on the edges, catching starlight. The road vanishes into fog, not with drama, but with quiet certainty, as if it still believes in destinations, even if the names of those destinations have drifted away. Whispers tell us that a road is a promise, not a promise of glory, but of connection. Even now, the road holds that promise, offering direction to no one in particular. as if it is content to be useful in silence. But if you stand among ruins under stars, you can feel that the most enduring Roman acts were not acts of shouting, they were acts of listening to gravity, to water, to distance, to weather, to time. A road appears first, a pale line under moonlight. Its stones are worn smooth, grass growing between seams like soft stitching. Dew beads on the edges, catching starlight. The road vanishes into fog, not with drama, but with quiet certainty, as if it still believes in destinations, even if the names of those destinations have drifted away. Whispers tell us that a road is a promise, not a promise of glory, but of connection. Even now, the road holds that promise, offering direction to no one in particular, as if it is content to be useful in silence. You might notice a coin near the roadside, faded copper, half embedded in the dirt. It no longer buys anything, it simply lies there, a small reminder that value changes, while stone remains. Where memory fades, the road keeps its straightness. Beyond the road, the aqueduct rises, arches spanning a shallow valley, fog drifting through them like slow breath. The structure looks almost alive, not because it moves, but because it seems to inhale the mist and release it again. The water that once ran along its channel is absent, or perhaps it runs unseen in some hidden part of the system, still following slope like a prayer. The aqueduct's endurance feels like a lullaby itself, a repetition of curves, a calm acceptance of weight. It holds emptiness the way a chest holds quiet air. And then, deeper into the empire's softened body, you find a vaulted chamber, a ruined bathhouse, perhaps. A broken oculus above lets moonlight fall in a narrow ribbon onto mineral-crusted stone. A shallow pool reflects stars like a second sky beneath your feet. The air is cool, and the space feels ceremonial, even in ruin, as if warmth once lived here and has left its memory behind like steam lingering in the mind. It is said that people came to such places to cleanse more than skin, to slow down, to be human in a structured world, and now the chamber remains, holding the shape of that slowness. Silence becomes the new water, the vault becomes the new breath. Nearby, a triumphal arch stands alone in countryside. Its opening frames constellations. Fog passes through it like incense in a temple. The arch does not lead to a city gate anymore. It leads to sky. It leads to nothing and everything. It stands as a reminder that even the loudest symbols of victory eventually become quiet frames for the stars. Marked by the moon, its stones look softer than they did in daylight, their edges rounded by time's patient hands. And then the amphitheater, a curve of seating like a sleeping shell, half collapsed, filled with mist. Once it held tens of thousands of voices, murmurs and shouts, laughter and hush. Now it holds only wind, and wind here is gentle. It moves through the tears like a careful visitor, touching stone lightly, not wanting to disturb the dream. The mystery rests in absence. Where did all the voices go? They rose once, they fell, they vanished into time. And the amphitheater, shaped to catch sound, now catches quiet instead. It holds emptiness as if emptiness is sacred. Beyond these monuments there is the city, though city is now a soft word. At night, its grid can be suggested by shadows, straight lines of darkness across pale ground, broken cornerstones, column stumps like teeth worn down. The order remains even when life has moved on. Strict lines once giving rise to human warmth. Now the warmth is gone, but the lines persist, asking nothing, offering orientation to any wandering thought. And beneath it all, beneath roads and aqueducts and arches, there are foundations. You can descend in imagination into a low corridor under stone, damp walls, mineral deposits glittering faintly, a hidden coin wedged between blocks like a secret seed. This is where the Empire's true patience lived, not in the grand silhouettes, but in the unseen work that held everything steady. Foundations do not ask to be admired, they simply hold. It is said that what endures often rests in darkness, and the Empire now seems to understand that. It has built itself into sleep, sinking from bright surface into quiet depth, letting the world move above while it remains, dreaming in stone. Even the sea has its echo of Rome. Imagine a ruined harbor quay at night, broken steps descending into calm, dark water, stars reflected on the surface. Salt crust whitens the edges of stone. A spiral shell rests in the foreground, like a small oceanic symbol of time's endless turning. The Empire once reached outward across waves. Now it is reflected in them, softened and distant, like a memory in water. The chapter drifts through what remains and what has vanished, and it never names an end, because the end is not a single moment. It is a long quieting, a gradual folding, a surrender to the rhythm that takes all loud things and makes them gentle. Beneath the silence, contradictions settle like dust, power expressed through patience, conquest transformed into infrastructure, ambition turned into shelter, a world built to last and then, inevitably, left behind. And yet the stones do not feel angry. They do not feel betrayed. They feel tired, as if the Empire has finally lain down, its great projects around it like blankets, its roads and arches and vaults like a body curled inward, resting. Now dawn approaches. The sky pales from dusk blue toward sandstone yellow. Fog begins to lift. The outlines of ruins sharpen slightly, then soften again as mist drifts across. In this shifting light, the stones look almost peaceful. Dust spirals remain at their feet. A star-marked tile lies in the foreground, catching the last whisper of moonlight. The Empire is still here, but quieter than ever. In the last silence, you are invited not to conquer, not to analyze, not to name, but to rest. To sit among the stones in your imagination and feel the strange comfort of endurance. To let the mind settle into the idea that builders, too, were human, hands that measured, placed, and then eventually stopped, hands that worked and then slept. Perhaps it was never meant to be concluded like a story. Perhaps it was meant to continue like a lullaby, always present in the background of the world, a rhythm of arches and roads and water channels, a reminder that the most lasting power is often the quietest. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, the echo is not a shout of empire. It is the soft continuity of stone, the patient curve of an arch, the straight calm of a road disappearing into fog, the unseen foundation holding weight without complaint. And as sleep approaches, you may find yourself drifting into that same patient quiet, resting among the ruins, beneath the listening stars, where the empire and the dreams that built it have finally fallen asleep.
As our journey through the work of Roman builders and engineers comes to a close, we hope you found peace in the timeless beauty of their creations. Though the world they knew is long gone, their legacy still stands tall, silent witnesses to human ingenuity. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful exploration of history. If this story has sparked curiosity in your dreams, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be part of our Twilight Tale community, where every night brings a new chapter to drift into. Until next time, sleep well, and may the echoes of ancient builders fill your dreams.